Welcome, everybody. I'm thinking you all know each other. I think, Melissa, do you know Sonia and Christy?
Don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay, how about if we just have you three introduce yourselves very briefly to each other? And the rest of us are known by everybody else, and so we will not be introducing ourselves.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Melissa. I'm based in the southwest of England in the United Kingdom, and I'm part of the some of the circles or communities of practice within Christine, Amy, Jim, everyone else's kind of circles of practice, and I see Sarah from time to time. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. So, Christy, you know you're muted. Okay, I see.
She's using her body language.
Yes.
I will take that to mean I will go next. I'm Sonia. Nice to meet you, see you. I am in Bowie, Maryland. Christy and I are business partners and good friends with Local Concepts, and we help clients with network cultivation, and mapping is one of the things that we are doing. Also in community with SumApp, Christine and Tim supporting our work with clients. And yeah, we've also supported REAMP's annual meeting, which is always a wonderful experience. And we're meeting up with Jim this Friday too. So yeah, wonderful to be here with all these lovely people.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, Melissa, very nice to meet you. And Curtis too. I don't believe that I've met you. Amy, I think you and I had a call once. It's been a while, but it's great to see you again. And yeah, Christy Gabbard, I'm calling from Southwest Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. And when Sarah says it's nice to see my favorite folks at Local Concepts, well, this is it. This is Local Concepts. These are all the folks that she could like at Local Concepts right here.
Well, okay, you don't have to make it obvious, but whatever.
Anyway, it's great to be with you all. Thanks.
Thanks. Curtis, so we're just having the people who don't know each other introduce themselves, and Melissa went first, and since you know Melissa, that's great, and you kind of came in at the end of Sonia and Christy, and I don't think you know those two, but you just heard Christy and the end of Sonia's, and so you could introduce yourself so they know who you are.
All right. Sorry I was late. I was clicking the wrong Zoom button over and over.
That happens.
I'm Curtis. I'm in Vancouver, Washington, the other Vancouver. I live on the banks of Chicken Creek with my wife. Nobody knows about Chicken Creek. That wasn't a question. I actually mean nobody knows about Chicken Creek. And I do community psychology work in anti-trafficking and youth suicide prevention. And yeah, and a lot of social systems mapping as much as I can get my fingers in.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just gonna frame up why we're here. This is first, it's not a Monday morning session, and the why for that is that because Melissa can never do Monday morning sessions, and neither can Sarah, and so it had to be a non-Monday time. And really what brought this up was one day, Sarah and I were having fun playing with this project and having little aha moments and brainstorming, and I was in a really cheerful mood because that's what's happening is one of the things that I love about my job, both Sarah part and the activity part. And I had a meeting with Melissa and Jim right after my meeting with Sarah. And so as we were checking in, I was like, oh, I'm just having so much fun with Sarah, blah, blah, blah. And And then Jim and Melissa were like, well, what are you doing? And I was like, well, we're doing this ripple effects map and it's really blah, blah, blah. And it lets me be creative and blah, blah, blah. And so then as we were chatting about it, I was like, I bet we should do a little, let Jim and Melissa would like to see it. But I didn't want to pull what we were doing up at that moment because we had other work to do. And then I thought I bet a few other people would be interested. So we scheduled this. So the map is, it isn't a map yet. It's in the brainstorming, sense making, clarifying what the hell we're doing stage. And my sense was this is a good stage to share with mappers, not the rest of the world, but people who have to think, who think about these things. And it was like, okay, the creative moment is now, like we're just sort of in the midst of the creative moment. Pretty soon we're going to be in the midst of just a bunch of junk work, like getting data and doing the grunty stuff. And then we'll have a map. And if we get through, as we're going through the grunty stuff, we're going to forget all of the creative stuff, because the grunty stuff always pushes the creative stuff out of your mind. So I was like, this is the moment. We either do it now or we don't do it. And so I asked this little group, not including Christy and Sonia, but the rest, I said, who wants to schedule a time? And Amy said, this is what I want. I want it scheduled within this time frame. I want it invited with this time frame. I want you to pick a date within this time frame. I wanted to include this. And Amy very generously, and I'm letting in two more people, said that she would be happy to do that. And so she did that. And so that's how we have, so it's a tiny bit crowdsourced, it's a tiny bit emergent, it's a lot emergent. And welcome Richard, and welcome Evan. I think he's here.
Hello, I'm here. I'm going to be eating lunch, but good to see you all.
Good to see you. Your name at any rate. Look forward to seeing you when you're done with your lunch. And you could just eat your lunch, because I think other people are eating their lunches too. So
almost finished with mine.
Yeah, everybody's eating. So I just was framing, and I'm gonna not back up and do introductions, but I do recognize that probably Richard and Evan both were trying to get in from the wrong link. So part of this process of me handing it off to Amy to run with was that there are little pieces of very important things that fall through the cracks. And so that's just triggering for those of you who are aware of this. For me, our need for an information flow system so that we know what to do and we're not fixing things at the last minute. But I regret that had an impact, Richard, on you and on Evan, so that you're joining us a few minutes late and not going to get to participate in the introductions. But Richard and Evan are both show up to various things and are wonderful people. And you could, if you want to, you could stick a little bit about yourself in the chat. That would be a way we could work with this. And I was just, as part of the framing, just sort of telling the story of how we got to today's session, which I'm not going to repeat, but I think we're at a point then where, yes, that's how we got here. And so welcome everyone. Oh, and the last thing is, and then since we've scheduled this session and, I had this idea, oh, let's do this, and we scheduled it, Sarah and I have talked a little bit about what I'm hoping for us to do with this time. And we will definitely sort of tell the story of the process that we've gone through. But for me, the story is a piece of the puzzle. And what I really want I want to draw out, and so I'm saying this up front as part of the purpose for the meeting, is to draw out the pieces of this process that lean on emergence, that lean on systems thinking, that lean on internal, like Sarah and I have both been doing systems thinking for a very long time. And it's kind of just sort of woven into our understanding of how to process. And I, as I was thinking about this, I was realizing Yeah, we're doing what we talk about doing, but we're not doing it with an activity and with the language and with a training session. We're just sort of doing it unconsciously. And I thought, let's draw that out so we can see how, as mappers, this practice that we talk about can show up. So that's that. I think I'm going to pause and hand it off to Sarah for
Okay.
the first piece of our journey to give us some
Yes.
background.
Absolutely. And, Christine's really doing the driving here. So if you feel like she's being rude later, if she interrupts me or cuts me off, it's actually a planned interruption, and totally intentional, and I'm totally fine with it. So it won't be rude to me at all. But I think I know almost everybody. I don't know Evan or Richard, but I'm Sarah Ann Shanahan. I'm Director of Community Management for the REAMP Network, where I have been a practitioner now for, this is my 16th year, and really been working with Christine since about 2017 to help our network develop a social systems map of our network. So, as Christine was alluding to, we're sort of in this like next phase generation of trying to do cool and interesting and new things with our network. And it really started because, for a network like REAMP, it's for years, we wanted to be able to tell the story of impact. And so often with networks, it's the ripples that really make the big splashes. And at the same time, it's really hard to take credit for those big splashes, right? Because that's our members doing the good work out there that's ultimately changing the world. And as an example of what I'm talking about, we had a group of folks in Iowa who started this Ratepayer Bill of Rights campaign. And like, this is them, right? Like, this is their idea, this is their campaign. But we know that the reason that they generated the idea for this campaign, it was a result of participating in the network, right? We've been on this long journey of acting equitably. And then just before they launched this campaign, some of them came to a summit where we were having conversations about like, what if we thought about energy, clean energy, as a human right? And as we applied that frame, what kind of new and interesting things might emerge? So that's just like one example of how like that ripple kind of played out where, we've been doing some things, we have this meeting, and it ultimately then led to members running this campaign. So, on occasion, staff, we would try to track these ripples quite poorly, I might add, by occasionally opening up a spreadsheet and trying to jot down some ideas of like, this thing happened that caused this thing, and here's why we believe this to be true. Not really good. And then it kind of died. It wasn't really being useful. It was a hard practice for us to keep up. And it was really just us staff kind of thinking about it. But it most recently reemerged because we're celebrating 20 years of REAMP. And so it really kind of led us to kind of come back to this question about not only how could we map ripples, but how could we really, collect these stories of impact that are visible, not only to staff, but also to other people in the network. And that's sort of what jump-started the conversations with Christine.
Thanks for that background.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you, so I just want to acknowledge for those of you who have just entered in the last couple minutes, Tom and Denise, I'm guessing that we had a little bit of a link challenge, and that's part of what's making you show up after we've gotten started. And so I just want to acknowledge the impact of that. And but we're not going to back up. We're just going to continue to move forward. So if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to. And where we are is I sort of have given us some background on how we came up with this session, which is a new thing. And we're just sort of, it's emerging as we go. And then Sarah just gave a little background about REAMP and her role in REAMP. And then give a little background about the impetus for this project that she and I are working on. And I think Denise and Tom, that you know who Sarah is, yeah, okay. So you don't need that grounding. Is there anything that anyone who showed up late feels a strong need for before we can move forward? I just want to make sure that you're all settled and feel like you've arrived and you're good. Okay, thanks. Okay, Curtis.
Could I just get like a 10-second explanation of what REAMP is?
Yeah, absolutely. So REAMP, we are a network of nonprofits that includes advocacy organizations as well as philanthropic organizations who are all thinking systemically and acting collaboratively so that we can equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050.
Awesome. That was a short elevator ride, and I get it.
She's good at it.
I do the orientations, can you tell?
Yeah. Yes.
And
Thanks.
I'm going to just add a couple things, which is REAMP is they're just, as she just said, celebrating their 20th anniversary. They're one of the most mature and developed networks, intentional networks in the country. And almost every network weaving book you read will have them as a case study. And Sarah has been a core member of the team for 16 years. And so this is Sarah's like growing up. She's younger than most of us, and she grew up in this network. So Sarah is like
Wow.
a deep network thinker, like deep as a native language. For the rest of us, it's sort of a second language, but for her, and that's why it's really exciting and fun for me to work with her when I get to. Okay, so Sarah reached out, wanted to do a ripple, to talk about how we can map these ripple effects that have taken place over the last 20 years. And a little bit of background for me is when I first started doing, before we started building SumMap and before we started doing social system mapping, I had played with ripple effects mapping a little bit, and I had this vision of being able to incorporate, and then as I move forward into social system mapping, I always wanted to incorporate a ripple effects map with a social system map. I was like, there's got to be a way to integrate them and have it so you can see not only what are the ripple effects, but who was part of the ripple effects, who launched them, all these big ideas in my head. And I've spent years sort of, occasionally someone says, what about ripple effects mapping? And I try to convince them we should do one, and we don't. And so this was a first actual real opportunity to do one. And it was with one of my favorite persons to work with, who, with whom there's already a map. So we've been working on Sarah's map since 2017. So Sarah really understands the constraints and the challenges, et cetera. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. So we're working on this map. So Sarah, so our first step was to talk a little bit, to just wrap our heads around what are the things what's in Sarah's mind. And I don't know if I framed this up for the newer people, but part of what we want to do with our conversation today is, so I'm just repeating it briefly, sort of highlight the steps where in a mapping process, whether it's a social system mapping map or a ripple effects map or any kind of map, what if we're being the professionals or the persons who are showing up to help other people do this map, this project, there are two very different perspectives that are having to come together. One is the very philosophical, abstract, purposeful, not very structured stuff that's in the head of the person who represents the community. And the other one is me or us, when we're being in this role, who has to try to interpret this very messy, very not linear, not logical, this rather unconstrained bunch of ideas, and turn them into a structure that can be visualized in a meaningful way. And so I'm always listening to the desires and trying to translate them into structures and trying to ask the right questions that will help me know how to do this. And for, working with a social system map, we've kind of got some patterns. So we've kind of got some grooves. So we kind of know what we're doing, and we've shared a lot of experience. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was noticing how with this new project, we were in that space where Sarah's got a bunch of stuff in her head. And I'm like, okay, let's map it. And I've been thinking structurally about how could we use SumMap and how could we do workarounds and what would we have to do like this to get it mapped. And we're coming together for the first time with no common ground except for this concept of ripple effects. And we're trying to, and I'm trying to figure out how can I help her do this? So, and so that's kind of what I want to call, you sort of draw out in our conversation is just the thought process. And so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share with you what Sarah shared with me in the beginning. So I'm trying to understand, like,
You had to show the poorly designed spreadsheet, huh?
well, I mean, it's not just that, it's just like, it's just capturing stuff. And so I'm looking at the data and I'm like saying, you know, what are the patterns? What's repeated? Like, okay, I think these are what she means by ripples. And then I think there was another spreadsheet where there was some more subjective stuff. And then, so the thing, and then what it influenced, and then there's some stuff about this and that. And so I'm trying to ask questions that will help me understand what's going to be in the nodes, what's going to be in the connection questions. Are the connection question, like what will the questions from, oh, so I'll pause. I'll take a breath because I'm getting myself spit up. And I'm going to back up one step, which is to say our fantasy here was that we could make a ripple effects map in some app in such a way that we're enabling network members to add new ripples if they see something's missing that they think is significant, and to share their relationship to the ripples. So I don't know that anyone has done this level of complex, messy, crowdsourced ripple effects mapping, but I have like little ideas about how we can do that. And so I'm trying to interpret what Sarah's telling me when I'm looking at this spreadsheet into connections from ripple to ripple, connections from person to ripple, and yeah, and how to, I'm trying to look for that. And Sarah is telling, so I'm asking these questions, like, what does this mean? What do you mean by that? What would that look like? And Sarah's giving me what happens with clients a lot, this very long-winded, very circular thing that just doesn't land, and it doesn't answer my question. It like gives me a whole lot of meaning. It gives me a whole lot of high-level purpose. It gives me a whole lot of why do you want this? But it doesn't help me land anything in a structural way. I can't find anything to grip onto. And so we're sort of, I think we had a couple of meetings like this, and I have a vision of in my head of how the structure could go. So I'm trying to suggest that to Sarah, like, okay, here's how I'm seeing it. And she's not buying any of it. She's just like, that's not going to work because X and Y and Z. But she's hearing me at this meaning level, not at the structure level. And so for a couple times, I'm just like, oh shit, what did I get myself into? This is a mess. This isn't going to work. I don't have any sense of how to do this. But somewhere in this process, I'm starting to listen to, okay, I'm starting to realize, okay, I need to let go of, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I discover this over and over again in projects. I need to let go of what I know and what the constraints that I'm trying to stick what Sarah is saying into. And I need to help her settle further into it so that she can start to sense make of her own mess. And so I'm starting to listen. What's Sarah saying? What is she? And like, she's got this like, it came up a couple times like, well, I'm going to interview all these people. And I'm like, oh my God, no. Like, that's just going to like, oh my God, you can't do that. It's going to just be like mind spinning. There's going to be all kinds of like, we tried to do this once in the past, people are like, oh, this is a really important ripple is that my daughter adopted a new dog from the shelter. And I'm just like, oh, there's like 50 million of those in Sarah's map. And like, I don't want to deal with them. Like, no, I don't want to go there. So I can see that we're going to go down that path. And there's a piece of me at first that's trying to say, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And then I go, oh, that's what she's got energy to do. It's going to be good for her anyway. then it will, then she will generate enough stuff from other people that she will have to start to pattern spot and sense make herself with this overabundance of data. So what is my problem? Just say, go girl, you do it. So, so I did put some constraints around it. I told her exactly how I wanted her to do it. And then, and Sarah, before we go into the interview process that you went through,
Yeah.
I'm going to see if there's anything you want to add before we get into that process about what was going on between us and how you were seeing what was happening and how I was reacting to it.
I wasn't nearly as stressed out as Christine because I'm like, look, I got this big idea and you're smart. You can figure this out, right? So I definitely had this mindset coming into the conversation of like, we're shooting for the stars. But something that you said, like, I actually wrote this down because I feel like it's just a good reminder in general for those of us who are working in this complexity is like letting go of your own constraints, right? Oftentimes when we're listening to people or even trying to like problem solve, right? We have our own experiences and knowledge and we're like trying to fit everything into like our own mental models as they exist already. But sometimes you just kind of need to relax and let the process be the process and kind of let go of those things you're holding. Because I think where we're going with this is like cool things kind of started to emerge.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm learning is, so like there's that grown zone and there's that, like, we have to let go of our own preconceived notions and open it up. And I'm starting to discover, and this was a thing that I was just sort of discovering as we were in this phase, was you don't have to let it go totally anywhere. Like if I just said, you start doing interviews and I didn't tell you what I wanted you to capture and how I wanted you to think while you were doing those interviews, what would have happened is you would have done 5 interviews. You would have come back. You would have verbally repeated a whole bunch of lame ass stories that didn't land anything. I would have spent more hours struggling, having my brain exhausted, getting tense and freaked out because we've got a deadline, we've got to move, etc. And you wouldn't have known what I was needing you to look for. And so that was one of the things that I was like, okay, go do interviews. And then I was like, wait, record them, number 1, put them on a Miro board, number 2, so that only put a high level, like put each idea into its own sticky. Do not give me paragraph stickies, like distill the concept into a sticky. And so like, I just said, go do that for starters.
Yeah.
And so we did that. But so my point here is we let go of our constraints, but we don't let go of the need that we have in the process. So we don't let go of it so much that it just goes totally, because there's my mindset that we're struggling with, but there's also your mindset. And if I'm not intervening with your mindset in some way, I'm not pulling you toward me. You're not beginning to think with me. I'm thinking at you in a way that you can't hear. And then you're thinking at me in a way that I can't hear. And we're just thinking at each other sequentially. And that's what I see happening in our groups all the time, is that we need to be pulling each other together so that you're beginning to adopt some of what I need you to think about in order for me to do my part of the job. And I'm beginning to help you move in that way. And so who's doing the guiding and who's doing the leading? It's often, or the learning, it's often both of us trading off that. But I feel like we sort of say, oh, grown zone, just like everything can fly. And I've gotten to the point where I've sat in the grown zone for too many hours of my life to feel okay with just letting go. I still want to put some guide rails. And that worked really well with you because I feel really comfortable just telling you what to do. And which, as Christy has worked with me, knows I have some discomfort with that and I need permission. And so lately, like in working with Christy, I'm asking permission all the time to just tell you what to do or tell you what I'm thinking. But that's a way that I'm needing to learn to step into my own leadership, is like to know, yes, they need guidance. They need my guidance. I need to tell them, here's how we can move forward. So that's part of what was like, one of the learnings that we're doing here. And so now I'm going to share the Miro board. So I just said to Sarah, go do some interviews, do Post-its, and just see what you see. So I wanted to record everything so that we could go back to the actual text if we needed to. Taught her how to use Otter. I told you to start using Otter.
Which
And
I
then-
did. Okay, I failed at that, just for the record.
Did you? Oh, loser. No, I'm kidding. So, okay. So, how about Sarah, if you spend a few minutes, not going too deep, but just sort of
Yep.
saying, so you had these, so she did these posts, I said, I don't want you to do 1,000,000. I want you to do like 4 or 5 or 6. And then we're going to come back and we're going to think about them together. And then you can do more, but don't do 20 of them without me helping recalibrate and redirect.
Yep.
So what you were hearing in those first, which was Gail, Lola, Rachel, Sarah, and maybe Jessica, just like what you heard and what you did with the Post-its.
Yeah, why don't you zoom into Lola's a little bit? She's got a good storyboard, I feel like. So, well, 2 things happened. One is, Christine and I actually had a good conversation about what is the right questions to ask people for these interviews, right? Like, how specific are we trying to make them be, or how broad and open do we want people to be? And so her and I did that. I also did that iteratively with people as I was interviewing them, right? I kind of got to discover, like this led them to say more things that I know is in line with the thinking that Christine and I are doing. Here's how I need to refine that question. So it's constantly like, an evolving sort of process. But essentially what I did was, I just let people talk. I asked them a big, broad question. Hey, Lola has been involved in REAMP since basically the very beginning. So Lola, I just want you to tell me, in what ways has REAMP mattered? And as we go along, she would start very broad, like something like, oh yeah, like there was this communications thing that we had. We had this media center. I thought that was pretty good. Well, tell me a little bit more, like what did that lead to, or what was good about it? Well, actually it led to the production of this Midwest Energy News. Oh, and you know what? There was also this like polling and messaging thing that REAMP did too. That was actually really useful because state papers started like using our language that we were using, to talk about climate and energy. And so what I try to do is like, as she got onto a thread, I tried to identify that with like some sort of bulk of colored Post-its. And then I also tried to cascade them. So in my mind, I kind of understood too that like this blue communications dot was connected to a Midwest Energy News. On another thread, it was connected to the polling and to like the fact that we were able to get some language put in the paper. So I tried to group that, tried to keep threads together, tried to cascade them based on like there's some relationship here. This led to that, that led to that. And of course, as Christine said, we did record the interviews in case we needed to go back to them. But that's sort of what I did for each of the interviews.
I want to pause and see if anyone has any clarifying question. If there's anything that feels like you need an answer to before we can move forward for anyone. And I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see. Actually, yeah, just if you have a clarifying question that feels strong right now, just raise your electronic hand so I can be sure. Well, Jim, I can see your physical hand. So yes.
Sarah, can you say again when you identified some theme or whatever, how you made on the Miro board the connections to like the poll or whatever? Did you create that as a separate item? I don't see any lines. And
there are no lines. So I kind of cascaded them and tried to attach the Post-its to each other. So yeah, Christine's already going back and sharing. So if you look at the teal Post-its, that's the story I was kind of talking to you about. Like she started on this thread about communications work. It led to this MWEN, that's Midwest Energy News. So that was like one thing that it led to. But then she had this other idea about how communications had an impact. That was the polling and messaging development. And connected to that was the Des Moines Register using language. So I tried to just like connect them in a cascading way and like just physically touching. We didn't want to put any lines or anything like that too much into here because honestly, like this was already feeling like a lot of information to look at and understand.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Sarah did that, spent a month doing that.
I have just a follow-up question. I'm sorry, I had my physical hand up.
Okay.
Did you do the Post-its in situ, like during the interview?
Yes,
Like
I
Ash-
do all of this note taking in real time.
Gotcha. Thank
Okay, so Sarah did that. We get back together. There's 5 interviews on here. I kind of look at them. I let Sarah tell me about her experience.
Which for Christine was a lot of those lame ass stories, and she was like, "Yeah, blah 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 blah." I'm like, let's get to the
Okay, I'm paying attention, but I'm just like, okay, yep. Okay. And then I said, okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through these 5, and frankly, I didn't know what was going to emerge. I just know Sarah was going to do some stuff. She was going to run into some kind of noticing of something. She was going to share something with me. And after that, I was going to say, okay, well, now what? And then an idea would come to me. That's kind of how it works with me and Sarah. We're very comfortable with that. And so she did her, this is what I saw, and I listened, and I sat there and I went, okay, yeah, we've got this all over the place. They are not landing it. These interviews have not landed it. So, but it was clear to me what I could do now. And I could say, okay, because Sarah was starting to see it herself. She was starting to go, okay, it's hard to like things like, it's hard to say if this caused that, or if that's, like she was starting to think about the causal connections and the challenge of discerning them from the way people were telling stories and how the stories sort of went this way or that way, and or how they crossed each other across different interviews or whatever. So she was starting to struggle with that. What does a ripple even mean? And then at what scale are we going to start? Are we going to tend to this ripple? Because this was the thing for me is, you could say I got up tomorrow morning was a ripple of, the fact that I felt okay yesterday. And you could, you could turn anything into a ripple of anything else, because everything is connected and people will do that. And so someone's got to say, okay, so what I asked Sarah to do was to think about what is the story we're trying to tell with this map, and what level, what scale of impact or effect is relevant to that story. And so I asked her to go back through these 5 to, take what she had learned, continue to do interviews until she got sick of it to the degree she wanted. And I'll just say that a side effect of the interviews was that Sarah was reaching out. Sarah was getting people to start to think about the past and connect some more. And so she is sort of stirring up the heart and the mind related to this whole thing ahead of time with her interviews. And Sarah's a really good network convener in terms of staying in touch with people and finding lots of ways to interact and reach out. So it served the connection purpose, and it served the seeding, planting some seeds purpose, regardless of if it was useful for us or not. So when I saw that that's where she wanted to go, and I also saw that, yeah, she's going to get some benefit. The network's going to get some benefit from it no matter what. So let's just let her run with that and quit trying to be such a control freak, Christine, and see what happens there. So Sarah did that. And then what I asked her to do, and so that's why I'm saying, from my perspective, Sarah wants to interview everyone in the network. That's up to her. It's her time. Like we just needed a sampling to start to do the thinking. And so we got a sampling and we started to think more deeply. And then it's like, keep interviewing if you want to, you don't have to. I think we've got enough, but whatever. So she did choose to keep interviewing. So we can see there's more interviews. But so what I was asking her to do was, I said, okay, from each of these storyboards of other people's, pick out the high level impacts that you think help tell the story of the ripple effects for that the network wants to tell. What will be useful to you guys in a map for us to highlight. So pick those out, give them a label. Don't make them an action sentence, but make them like a noun, turn them into nouns, and only have one of each. Like if Lola refers to a Systems Thinking Academy and Rachel refers to a Systems Thinking Academy and Sarah, just put it as one. So I'm not asking you to repeat everybody's questions over and over. I'm asking you to distill this into the meaningful events that we can identify. And I said, I don't remember if it was this time or another time, but I said, and if you want, because we are trying to track who these are coming from, put each person's name, and then you can feel free to put a link from Lola to the working group, whatever. So all of Gail's, what Gail gave, there's links to, etc. So I asked Sarah to do this. And Sarah, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, this was so the first step of this, I used we wanted a timeline, right? Because part of what we're trying to do is tell a story over time, of how RAMP has evolved and how we've made impact. So we said, okay, like physically, we just need to see this on a linear spectrum, right? That's where the purple Post-its are. They're kind of years to kind of give me a little bit of spatial understanding. Then the first thing I did was I did go through those interviews, and I made them into yellow Post-its of what we described as a milestone. As Christine said, like, what is the noun? What is the thing? Okay. So after I did that, then I came back and I added people's names using the pink Post-its, and then used the lines to connect them to the yellow Post-its. So it's like, right, like she was saying, Lola talked about this, like there's just some connection there. So I did that as like a first sort of step. Then as I was kind of stepping back and looking, I was like, okay, like now I have these milestones. I've connected to the people to the milestones, but I can notice that in some cases, a milestone and a milestone also have a relationship or a connection to each other in some way. And so then I used the little yellow lines that go kind of more below the timeline axis there to try to connect those milestones that I knew had some sort of relationship with each other as well.
And what was surprising to me, and that was great. So this is probably the meeting when I was really excited, because what Sarah did, so I did not say, make a timeline. I did not say, another thing that you did that surprised me, that you did on your own, because you were pattern spotting unconsciously, you were doing this, and so you had these yellow Post-its, but then you also, and you were making lines, and then you also start to distinguish between the yellow ones and the green ones. And so I come back and it's like, oh my God, we're almost done. Like now I know, like we're not actually almost done, but now she just made for me, she just visualized the questions that I have been holding, which is, okay, Sarah, now that you've made these lines, our next step is to figure out what are the connection questions that go in these lines? What are the connection questions that go in these lines? What else you've already distinguished from, these are processes, and then these green ones are basically things, reports, decisions. I know I just said nouns, but she was just noticing in her own self, she started to distinguish there's two different kinds of these kind of stickies. So she did this started to do this organizing, which was what I was trying to get out of her without her having dug into the data enough to think at a high enough level to be pattern spotting. She was very much in each example and all of the ifs, ands, or buts that went into each example. So I had in asking her to distill the interviews, I was actually asking her, she started naturally doing pattern spotting and indicating the distinctions. And at this point, it was like, oh my God, that is so great. And so since then, it's really easy for us to say, okay, are there other ways we want to distinguish these? We're still working on finalizing the ripple Post-its. We've explored some of the dimensions we could, so for instance, we talked about there are 3 C's: connections, collective strategy, and capacity building. And I was like, is there a way you can assign that to these events? So we've been having a discussion that now we're starting to find the deeper, more specific details of the higher level thing that we're trying to do in a way that once we have a map in a map, it will be easy to make views that tell the story that we're trying to tell, and we'll have our sort of our categories that we need. We've been working on that, and then so Sarah had started doing turning the maps on the board into items on this list. And then we're putting like, okay, the green ones are the outcomes, the yellow ones are the processes. So we're having her go through and identify these things. And then we get to, we're talking about direct versus indirect events. So we're sort of filling this out in a way so that then Tim can create the ripple survey in the map. The ripple survey won't go to anybody. It will just be Sarah will fill in the spreadsheet. She will be defining the dimensions that are needed, keeping them in the spreadsheet. And then Tim is creating automations so that it's giving him the email that he needs for loading it and various other little things that we're trying to figure out that we need to place it on the map. But so now we've got this going, and then our next step is to define these questions, the ripple to ripple questions, and then we will start to define the person to ripple questions and get those set up in SumApp. And then we will be on our way. I will show you what we have now in Kumu in a moment.
I was let me say a couple of things here though, Christine.
Yep, that's what I was
so I will say for me, like doing the interviews and doing the initial, like this is connected to this or this has a relationship, like just simply like drawing the lines, I actually found this very satisfying and pretty easy, which is funny because I think at this time, this is when Christine was feeling like more angst about like, okay, like let's get to the point, right? What does this mean? Like we got to simplify this. We got to figure out how to make this usable. Like this for me was like the easy part. What got hard for me is when we had to start actually like getting granular and defining like some of these relationships, which is what you were alluding to in the spreadsheet that Tim is working from now, right? Having to distinguish like, is this something that like we as a network have direct control over? Or is this like an indirect thing that like more of our members have control over? Is this outcome? Is it a policy? Is it a resource? Is it whatever? Like even coming up with those categories, I found incredibly challenging because there's always these exceptions to the rule. So I found myself having a really hard time digging into that. And I'm sure Christine was more like, look, here's what I'm hearing. Here's my suggestions. You can do what you want, but you got to figure this out, right? This is your network. This is your stories. You have at it. So I just thought that was like an interesting difference between the two of us in terms of what our experience was like in the process itself.
Yeah. And that's part of what I'm trying to say is, we have our different views, right? And what seems really and feels really easy to you, I'm trying to translate into what I need.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the translation. I'm doing the listening and the translation, which is a really heavy lift because you're having to suspend your own thinking without losing your own thinking. And then we're flipping it back to you. And what I want to say is those dimensions that you're finding hard at, after you did this lovely layout, the dimension piece that's what I was trying to get at in the first place. And we weren't able to get at it because you hadn't done this organizing work. And so you just kept going around in circles and telling me the exceptions, or you would take a different one and look at it from another. And it's like, I can't do this. I can't talk about these one at a time because we're never going to land anything. We need to zoom out. And then we could have a visual way of trading back and forth. Who's doing the heavy lifting and who is supporting by maybe just asking helpful, like I'm just looking at it and I'm going, well, I'm looking and I'm seeing other patterns. And is it possible that, X, or if we look at it by Y, what happens there? And that's for me, the easy part, but for you, it was challenging. So that's part of like, for me, that's what's when like doing that kind of thinking back and forth, in a purposeful way is like my idea of like real fun and joy. And that's what was making me effusive when Melissa and Jim were inquiring into this process. And I think I'm good. I'm done telling that story. I want to see if there are questions. And if you want, we can look at the map. The map is not ready. It is like we're iterating in terms of, so now Tim has this data set that he can load into SumApp. And so all these nodes are loaded as organizations. We're using the dual elements. We're pretending these are organizations. So they're loaded into the map as into SumApp as organizations. And Tim is now trying to struggle with how to make this view do what we want. I can show you that or not, but I think I'll stop here and see if we have questions. Aware that we have a
One
minute.
other thing that I will say that I think was actually really important as part of this process for us, Christine, was the frequency in which we were meeting. So
Yeah.
on average, we've been meeting about every couple of weeks
Yeah.
to really keep up a steady cadence of like, we're checking in, maybe she has some homework, maybe I have some homework, whatever. But I think that regular cadence also helped keep our thinking more together than if we would have met less frequently.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Curtis, I see your
This is very
electronic.
exciting. Just to say that to begin with, I have a million questions, but I just want to ask one. Do you see this moving in a direction where MAP participants could engage with it in an undirected way? Is that kind of where you're trying to get to eventually?
That's definitely our vision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're just that final step. There's like a whole lot of clarity that we need to have before we can
Mhm.
even begin to start playing with how would we invite, because we started thinking about that. What is it we want to know about their connection to these? And that was like way beyond a step beyond where we could actually even understand each other to communicate about. But yeah, that's the vision. That's what
Okay, then I want to hang out as close to the epicenter of this as I can. As I can.
Cool. Jim.
I may have the initial impetus wrong, but I'm thinking tracking impact from the ripples that emanate from small places means that there's different granularity between small impacts and the larger impacts they cascade into. And so I'm wondering if the yellow stickies distinguish between small things that led to larger things, or whether I'm way off here.
No, I would say that most of like the yellow stickies are probably like most of them are like things that REAMP really had direct like control over. So as an example, it's like, when we got our start, we did that systems analysis. So that's a yellow sticky. And that led us to create these working groups. That's a yellow sticky, right? Like that's a REAMP structure. Now, one of those working groups ended up doing a regional week of action. That I might put as a green sticky. Like as a full network, not everybody was like involved in that effort or even helped create it, but a subset of members did, and it was sort of like its own little thing, right? We had this little 5-state campaign thing. So that one I might put as a green sticky. But all of these decisions, like honestly, they're very subjective, right? Like this was part of my challenge, is to figure out like what's important, what's not, and ultimately what gets included.
Yeah. I want to just one of the guiding principles for me has been so Melissa is the executive director of REAMP, and Melissa is always having to fundraise for REAMP. And when Melissa started to realize what we were doing, one of her things was, oh, I could use this map for fundraising. And so in my mind, when we get really stuck, my question for Sarah is, what will help Melissa fundraise? Like, is that a significant thing for Melissa's fundraising needs? Or is that just something that's, I mean, there's plenty of non-total pragmatic stuff going on. I mean, but in terms of when we're making that call. But Jim, I just want to respond, we have not explicitly explored and tried to distinguish between big and little. Size, whatever that might mean to you, and we don't need to go into what that might mean. Size has not been a dimension that we have thought about explicitly yet. It's maybe being gotten through by a proxy thing, but that's not what we've done so far. And I don't know that we need to.
But the other dimension is time, so that one led to another.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of them last over time, like state tables lasted years. So we're still sort of the time frame thing. We're still sort of sorting out a little bit, or trying to fine tune. Other questions? Evan.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna have to hop off at the hour. So I'm looking forward to like 5 more hours of this conversation because there's also a billion questions. Can you just talk briefly about the value of SumMap and the dual elements feature? You mentioned that like acting outcomes would be coded as organizations. So I'd love to hear more of a vision of like who are the people and how would an organization or a person like Lola ultimately use or access their node in order to like update outcomes. Like would Lola have access to a lot of nodes that were relevant to
No.
them? So I'd love to hear about that.
No, Evan, we're not using the organization node the way you are in terms of different organizations being the data suppliers or the representatives of those nodes. We're defining the nodes, Sarah and I are defining the nodes in a spreadsheet and loading them. So we're not asking anybody to, at this point, we may discover that there's some ways we wanna include some links or something, but right now, we're in charge of all of those nodes and loading them. And the ways that other people would be connected to those nodes or related is simply to say things like, and we haven't defined these questions yet. So this is still in process, but questions like, I attended that, or I started that, or I was aware of that and it changed me, or something like, we haven't figured that out. We haven't codified that yet, but that's the only person to, org node or Ripple node.
Okay, so the people is someone like Lola would have a person profile and could identify connections to the organization level, which is outcomes of the Ripple, so that people can identify which thing that they've participated in or benefited from.
Yeah, and Evan, this is a map that we've had in place for like 7 years almost. So the people nodes are, I mean, there's a lot of the connections and a very robust survey. So there's already a very robust social system map in place. This is just another layer that we're adding. So we're not developing that whole people piece right now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we will definitely, I mean, Sarah and I from the beginning had the intention of sharing the map when it's done. And so we will do that. We will consider if there's maybe another step in this process where it might be fun to repeat this conversation before the map is complete. The map will be the 20th anniversary annual meeting will be in the end of September, and we will definitely have it done before that and be sharing it in the annual meeting. And so look for more if you found this interesting, and if there's any other questions or follow-up, feel free to send them to me. And thank you so much for joining us. This was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.